The massive command ship Eternal Dominion drifted through the void like a predator circling wounded prey. Its hull stretched 15 kilometers from bow to stern, bristling with weapons that could crack planets in half. Admiral Vextar stood on the bridge, his forearms crossed behind his chitinous back, watching the small blue world spin lazily below. How pathetic, he clicked, his mandibles twitching with amusement. Look at them down there, still burning fossil fuels, still killing each other over imaginary lines on their dirt ball. His aide, Commander Zephyrin, consulted her holographic display. The species calls itself human, Admiral. Population, approximately 8 billion. Technology level, primitive. Military assessment, laughable. Vextar's compound eyes glittered. In his 3 centuries of conquest, he had subjugated over 200 worlds. The pattern never changed. Show up, demonstrate overwhelming force, accept surrender, strip the planet of resources, move on. Simple, efficient, profitable. Open a communication channel to the surface, he ordered. Let's get this over with. I have a dinner engagement on Proxima Station. The transmission crackled to life, broadcasting simultaneously to every human communication device on Earth. Vextar's image appeared on television screens, computer monitors, and smartphones across the globe. His towering insectoid form filled the frame, forearms spread wide in a gesture of absolute authority. Primitive creatures of the third planet. His voice boomed, translated into every human language simultaneously. I am Admiral Vextar of the Galactic Empire. Your world has been selected for harvest. Your resources will serve the greater good of civilized species throughout the galaxy. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in across continents. However, the Empire is not without mercy. Surrender now, and your deaths will be swift. Your children will be raised as productive servants. Resist. His mandibles clicked ominously. And we will make examples of your cities that will echo through the cosmos for 1,000 years. On Earth, panic erupted. Stock markets crashed. Governments convened emergency sessions. Religious leaders prayed. Scientists frantically calculated. Military commanders studied their pathetically inadequate arsenals. But in a small bunker beneath the Rocky Mountains, a different kind of meeting was taking place. General Sarah Chen, director of the classified Prometheus project, stood before a room of 20 individuals who officially didn't exist. They represented humanity's deepest secrets, technologies that wouldn't see public light for decades, if ever. Ladies and gentlemen, she said quietly, it appears our contingency planning wasn't paranoid enough. Dr. Marcus Webb, the project's lead physicist, looked up from his tablet. The energy readings from their ship are concerning, but not impossible. Explain, Chen ordered. They're using controlled antimatter reactions for propulsion and power generation. Advanced, yes, but we've been working on similar principles for the past 15 years. The real question is, what don't they know about us? Across the room, Colonel James Rivers, the military liaison, spoke up. Ma'am, with respect, we need to send a response. If we're going to fight, we need to buy time. Chen nodded. Dr. Webb, is the quantum communication array operational? Has been for 6 months. We can punch a signal through their ship's hull like it's tissue paper. Do it. Send them our response. 30 minutes later, Admiral Vextar was enjoying what he assumed would be humanity's final desperate plea for mercy when his communication officer suddenly straightened in alarm. Admiral, we're receiving a transmission, but sir, it's not coming through normal channels, it's inside our ship somehow. The bridge fell silent. In 3 centuries of conquest, no primitive world had ever managed to penetrate Imperial communication systems. The view screen flickered and a human face appeared. The creature was small, bipedal, with only 2 arms and disgustingly soft-looking skin. But its eyes held something Vextar had never seen in a primitive species before. Certainty. I am General Sarah Chen of the Terran Defense Coalition, the human said calmly. We have received your ultimatum. Vextar leaned forward. And you call to beg for your pathetic lives? Chen's expression didn't change. No, we call to give you a warning. A ripple of laughter ran around the Imperial Bridge. Vextar's mandibles clacked with amusement. You warn us? Leave now, Chen said simply. Leave our system and never return. This is your only chance. The laughter grew louder. Vexitar felt his battle-scarred carapace warming with mirth. And if we refuse your generous offer? For the first time, something like sadness flickered across the human's features. Then God help us all, because you have no idea what you're about to wake up. The transmission ended. Vextar stared at the blank screen for a long moment, his four arms slowly uncrossing. In 3 centuries of conquest, no species had ever spoken to him like that. They begged, they threatened, they offered tribute, they cursed him to their various gods. None had ever warned him. Admiral? Commander Zephrin's voice was uncertain. Orders? Vextar's moment of doubt passed. He had conquered worlds that could shatter mountains with thought alone. He had defeated hive minds spanning solar systems. What could one small, backward planet possibly— Sir! The sensor operator's voice cracked with panic. I'm reading massive energy signatures across the Earth's surface. They're everywhere. On the tactical display, thousands of red dots suddenly blazed to life across every continent. Underground facilities that hadn't existed moments before were coming online, their power signatures climbing to impossible levels. What are those readings? Vexitar demanded. I don't know, sir. The energy output it's like they're powering up an entire fleet, but it's all underground. Vextar felt the first cold touch of uncertainty creep up his spine. But he had come too far to turn back now. His reputation, his career, his entire identity was built on absolute victory. Prepare the orbital bombardment array, he ordered. Target their largest population centers. We'll see how defiant they are when half their species is ash. But as the Eternal Dominion's weapons began to charge, something else was happening in the depths of space, far beyond their sensors' reach. Small probe no larger than a briefcase drifted through the asteroid belt. It had been there for decades, disguised as space debris, waiting, watching, recording, and now, finally, transmitting. The signal raced across impossible distances, bending space-time itself, carrying a message that would change everything. Deep, in the void between galaxies, something ancient stirred. Something that remembered when the universe was young. Something that had been waiting for this moment for a very, very long time. The real war was about to begin. Chapter 2. First Blood. The orbital bombardment began at exactly 1432 Universal Standard Time. From the bridge of the Eternal Dominion, Admiral Vextar watched with satisfaction as lances of superheated plasma tore through Earth's atmosphere. Each beam carried enough energy to vaporize a city block. The first target was New York. 8 million humans about to become an object lesson in Imperial power. Impact in 5 seconds, reported the weapons officer. Vextar leaned forward, savoring the moment. This would break the humans' will to resist. It always did. The plasma beam struck Manhattan dead center and disappeared. For a heartbeat, nobody on the Imperial Bridge moved. The tactical display showed the beam had reached its target. The energy had been delivered. But New York still glittered, below them completely untouched. Sensor malfunction? Vextar asked quietly. No, sir. The beam fired correctly, full power, but the energy, it's gone. Before Vexitar could respond, the human general appeared on their communication screen again. Chen looked tired now, as if she'd aged years in the past few minutes. You fired on civilians, she said. Her voice carried a weight that made Vexitar's chitin itch. We really hoped you wouldn't do that. Impossible tricks won't save your species, Vextar snarled. We have enough firepower to crack your planet like an egg. Yes, Chen agreed. You do. And if that's really what you want to do, we can't stop. You. She paused. But you fired on civilians, children, innocent people who never threatened you. Something in her tone made Vextar hesitate. What are you implying? I'm not implying anything. I'm telling you that you just crossed a line humanity spent 10,000 years learning not to cross. Chen's image flickered as if the transmission was struggling against interference. You declared war on our species, all of our species. And now, the screen went dark. Across Earth's surface, the hidden facilities that had been powering up for the past hour reached full operational status. In bunkers buried miles beneath the seafloor, weapons that had never been tested outside computer simulations hummed to life. The Prometheus project had been humanity's most classified program for 23 years. Officially, it didn't exist. Unofficially, it was humanity's insurance policy against extinction. They had studied every alien encounter, every crashed probe, every fragment of technology that had fallen to Earth over the past century. They had learned, they had adapted, they had prepared, and they had built things that would have horrified their own species. Dr. Webb's voice echoed through every Prometheus facility simultaneously. Pattern blue is authorized. All stations, pattern blue. God forgive us. High above the Pacific Ocean, the first human weapon fired. It wasn't a missile or a beam or anything. The Galactic Empire would have recognized as a weapon. It was a carefully controlled tear in the fabric of space-time itself, guided by quantum calculations that pushed the boundaries of possibility. The Eternal Dominion simply ceased to exist for 0.003 seconds. When it reappeared, a perfect sphere, 50 meters in diameter, was missing from its center hull. The sphere included the primary computer core, 3 fusion reactors, and Admiral Vextar's private quarters. Emergency klaxons wailed across the dying ship as atmosphere vented into space. Vextar, bleeding green ichor from a dozen cuts, pulled himself up from the deck of his now half-destroyed bridge. "Damage report," he screamed. "Hull breaches on decks 12 through 18. Primary power offline. Weapons array non-responsive." "Sir, how did they—" "I don't care how." Vextar's mandibles were frothing with rage and fear. "Ready the planetary crackers. If we can't conquer this world, we'll destroy it." But even as he gave the order, he knew something had changed. In 3 centuries of conquest, his enemies had never heard him. They'd never even scratched the Eternal Dominion's hull. These humans had removed 50 meters of Imperial warship as casually as a surgeon excising a tumor. What else could they do? He was about to find out. On Earth, in the primary Prometheus command center, General Chen watched the tactical display with grim satisfaction. The alien ship was wounded but still functional. Still dangerous. "Target their communication array." "Next," she ordered. "I want them isolated." "Ma'am," Colonel Rivers spoke up from his station, "we're detecting massive energy buildups from their remaining weapons. If they're planning what I think they're planning, I know." Chen's voice was steady, but her hands were shaking. Pattern green. All stations. This time, 12 facilities, fired simultaneously. The Eternal Dominion didn't just lose pieces of itself. It found itself twisted through dimensions that had no names, its hull folded through angles that shouldn't exist. When the weapons finished their work, the mighty Imperial dreadnought was still intact. It was also inside out, and upside down, and somehow existing in 3 different locations at the same time. Admiral Vexitar found himself standing on what used to be the ceiling, watching his bridge crew try to figure out how to operate controls that were now embedded in their own bodies. The laws of physics hadn't been broken aboard his ship. They'd been rewritten in a language that made his compound eyes weep. "Sir," gasped Commander Zephyrin, who was now somehow 2-dimensional but still functional. "What are these creatures?" Vextar didn't answer. He couldn't answer. Because for the first time in 3 centuries he was afraid. And deep in space, growing closer by the moment, the response to that ancient probe signal was finally arriving. Something vast. Something old. Something that remembered when galaxies were young and Earth was just a ball of cooling rock. Something that had been watching humanity's development with very, very great interest. The Galactic Empire thought they were fighting primitives. They were about to discover their mistake. Chapter 3. The Awakening. 3 hours after the Eternal Dominion had been turned into an impossible geometric paradox. Emergency signals began flooding Imperial communication networks across the galaxy. Fleet Admiral Korvax, Supreme Commander of the Imperial Third Fleet, stood in his war room on the fortress world of Zirion Prime, staring at reports that made no sense. "Say that again," he demanded, his 6 eyes focusing on the trembling communication officer. "Sir, the Eternal Dominion reports successful engagement with primitive target designated Sol 3. However," the officer's voice cracked. "Sir, they're requesting immediate evacuation and full psychiatric rehabilitation for their crew." Psychiatric rehabilitation? Admiral Vextar's last coherent transmission claimed that the humans folded our ship like origami made of nightmares. He's been repeating that phrase for the past hour. Korvax had known Vextar for 50 years. The old warrior had conquered more worlds than most species had explored. He didn't break, he didn't bend, he certainly didn't babble about nightmare origami. What's the tactical assessment? Unknown. Sir, we lost all coherent intelligence after their first engagement, but, sir, the officer hesitated. We're receiving similar reports from across the sector. Any Imperial ship that approaches the Sol system is affected. Affected how? The Crimson Mandate reported that their engines were replaced with flowers. The Iron Fist says their crew has been turned into poetry. And the Death's Head? The officer swallowed hard. The Death's Head claims they're now made entirely of the concept of the color blue. Korvax felt his carapace itching. In 2 centuries of military service, he'd never heard reports like these. They sounded like the fevered dreams of a drug addict, not tactical intelligence from his best commanders. "Send the 7th Battle Group to investigate," he ordered. "I want to know what these humans are really doing." But even as he gave the order, something else was happening. Something that would make the destruction of a few Imperial ships seem trivial by comparison. The signal from humanity's hidden probe had traveled farther than anyone imagined. It had passed through regions of space that didn't appear on any star chart, carrying its message to intelligences that predated the formation of planets. And now, something was responding. Captain Elena Vasquez was aboard the International Space Station when it happened. She'd been documenting the impossible light show below, watching Imperial ships twist into configurations that hurt to look at, when her instruments detected something approaching from deep space. Something big. "Houston, are you seeing this?" She radioed to Earth. "Affirmative, ISS. We're tracking an object, multiple objects, approaching from outside the system. Speed is..." A long pause. "Elena, they're traveling faster than light, but our instruments show they're not using any known propulsion method." "What do you mean?" "I mean they're not moving through space, they're moving space around them. It's like reality is just making room for them to exist wherever they want to be." Elena felt her heart rate spike. First aliens attack Earth, then humanity reveals weapons that rewrite physics, and now something else was coming. Something that moved by convincing the universe to relocate itself. What else was humanity hiding? She was about to find out. In the Prometheus Command Center, every alarm was screaming. General Chen stood frozen as she watched the impossible readings scroll across her displays. "Ma'am," Dr. Webb's voice was barely a whisper. "The approaching object, they're not ships." "What do you mean?" "I mean they're not artificial constructs at all, they're alive. Biological signatures like nothing in our databases. And they're huge. The largest is approximately the size of Earth's moon." Chen felt the floor drop out from under her. "Are they hostile?" "Unknown. But General, they're responding to our probe signal, the one we've been broadcasting for the past 30 years. "What probe signal?" Webb turned to face her, his face pale with shock. "Ma'am, with respect, that's classified above your level. But these things, they're coming because we called them." Before Chen could respond, every screen in the facility flickered to life. Not with displays or readouts, but with a face. It was human. Sort of. The features were familiar, 2 eyes, a nose, a mouth, but something about the proportions was wrong. The eyes were too knowing, the smile was too kind. And when it spoke, its voice seemed to come from everywhere at once. "Hello, children," it said gently. "We're so proud of how you've grown." Chen's training kicked in. Unknown entity, possible threat, establish communication protocols. "This is General Sarah Chen of the Terran Defense Coalition. Identify yourself." The being's smile widened. "Oh, Sarah. We've been watching you specifically for quite some time. Your work on the quantum displacement array was particularly elegant. Very creative solution to the energy distribution problem." Chen felt ice in her veins. The quantum displacement array was theoretical work she'd done in graduate school 20 years ago. Work that was classified at levels that didn't have names. Work that had formed the basis for humanity's reality-warping weapons. "How do you know about that?" "Because we taught your species how to think about physics that way. Not directly, of course. We're not supposed to interfere. But humans have always been such clever little puzzle solvers. You just needed the right pieces scattered around for you to find." The realization hit Chen like a physical blow. "You've been manipulating our development." "Guiding," the being corrected gently. "There's a difference. We scattered hints. We left breadcrumbs. We made sure certain ideas occurred to the right people at the right times. But every discovery, every breakthrough, every magnificent leap forward, that was all you." Across the globe, the conversation was being broadcast to every Prometheus facility. Thousands of humanity's brightest minds were hearing the truth for the first time. They were not alone. They had never been alone. "Why?" Chen asked. The being's expression grew sad. "Because we were dying out. Our species is old, Sarah. Older than galaxies. We've seen civilizations rise and fall like waves on a beach. We've watched as the universe grew cold and empty and hostile to intelligence. But then we found you." The image shifted, and suddenly Chen was looking at Earth as it appeared millions of years ago. Primitive, volcanic, hostile to life. Such a small, angry little world, but life clung to it with such determination. And eventually life became clever, and clever became curious, and curious became human. The scene changed again. Now Chen saw early humans discovering fire, inventing the wheel, building the first cities. "We've been watching you grow up for 10,000 years. Watching you learn to think, to dream, to imagine possibilities we'd forgotten existed, and we realized something wonderful." "What?" "You think like us." "Not exactly like us. You're far more chaotic, more emotional, more beautifully unpredictable. But fundamentally, you solve problems the way we do. You see patterns the way we see them. You ask questions the way we ask them." Chen's head was spinning. "You're saying we're related?" "Not related, but compatible. We realized that while our species was aging toward extinction, yours was just beginning to understand what you could become. So we made a decision." "What decision?" The being's smile returned, but now it carried weight that made Chen's chest tight. "We decided to make sure you survived long enough to replace us." The implications hit her like a hammer. The weapons, the technology, everything we've built is based on principles we made sure you'd discover, yes. But Sarah, you have to understand, we didn't give you weapons, we gave you tools. What you do with them, how you choose to use them, that's entirely up to you. Around the globe, Imperial ships were still dying in impossible ways as humanity's reality-warping weapons continued their work. But now, Chen understood what she was really seeing. This wasn't humanity's first war. This was humanity's final exam. "Galactic Empire," she said slowly. "You know about them. We know about all of them. 17 different species have achieved interstellar civilization in this galaxy over the past 1,000,000 years. All of them developed the same way: conquest, expansion, exploitation. All of them eventually stagnated and declined. But humans." The being paused, and Chen could swear she saw tears in its two knowing eyes. "Humans are different. You don't just conquer, you adapt. You don't just expand, you explore. You don't just exploit, you create. So when the Empire finally came for you, we knew it was time." Time for what? Time to see if you're ready to inherit the universe. As if summoned by those words, the massive biological entities that had been approaching from deep space finally arrived at the edge of Earth's solar system. They were beautiful and terrible, like living art drawn across the void. Each one was unique, impossibly complex, and older than human civilization. They were the beings that had been guiding humanity's development for millennia, and they had come to see if their children were ready to grow up. But the Galactic Empire wasn't finished with Earth yet. And when Fleet Admiral Korvax learned what humanity really was, what they were becoming, he would make a decision that would either doom his species or save them. The real test was about to begin. Chapter 4. The Choice Fleet Admiral Korvax stood before the assembled war council of the Galactic Empire, his 6 eyes burning with a rage that had been building for days. The holographic displays around him showed the impossible. 17 battle groups, the most powerful military force in the galaxy, reduced to geometric impossibilities by a species that barely understood faster-than-light travel. "Explain to me," he said, his voice deadly quiet, "how primitives who still use chemical rockets have destroyed half my fleet." The council chamber fell silent. Around the circular table sat the greatest military minds of a dozen species, beings who had conquered thousands of worlds, who had turned warfare into an art form. None of them had answers. General Thrix of the Saurian hegemony was the first to speak. "Admiral, the tactical reports are inconsistent. Our ships aren't being destroyed in any conventional sense. They're being altered." "Altered how?" "The Devastator reports that their weapons have been transformed into musical instruments that play only lullabies. The Planet Killer claims their entire crew has been turned into sentient mathematics, and the Iron Will..." Thrix paused. "The Iron Will says they now exist as a philosophical argument about the nature of existence." Korvax felt his mandibles grinding. "Impossible." "Yes, sir. That's what makes it so disturbing." Before Korvax could respond, the chamber's communication array activated. But instead of an Imperial transmission, a human face appeared on the display. It was the same female who had warned Admiral Vextar days ago. General Chen looked tired. More than tired. She looked like someone carrying an impossible weight. "Fleet Admiral Korvax," she said formally. "I am General Sarah Chen of the Terran Defense Coalition. I believe we need to talk." The War Council erupted in angry chittering and roars. How had a primitive managed to penetrate Imperial communication systems? How did she know Korvax's name? How was any of this possible? Korvax raised a hand for silence. "You have 30 seconds to justify your existence, human." "I don't need 30 seconds, Chen replied. "I need you to understand that this war ends now. Not because we're defeated. We've proven we can protect ourselves. And not because you're defeated, though your current tactical situation is problematic. Then why? Because something bigger than both our species is watching. And the choices we make in the next few minutes will determine whether either of us survives the next century." As if summoned by her words, the display shifted. The image of Chen was replaced by something that made every being in the council chamber freeze in terror. It was beautiful and impossible, a face that seemed to shift between features of every intelligent species in the galaxy, but perfected, beyond recognition. When it spoke, its voice carried harmonics that made reality itself ring like a bell. "Hello, children of the Empire," it said gently. "We need to discuss your future." Korvax had conquered 100 worlds. He had stared down the mightiest warriors of a dozen species. He had never felt fear like this. "What are you?" he whispered. "We are what your species might become, given time and wisdom. But more importantly right now, we are what humanity is becoming. And that presents you with a choice." The display shifted again, showing the galaxy from an impossible perspective. Millions of stars, billions of worlds, the entire sweep of the Milky Way laid out like a map. "Your empire has claimed dominion over 3,000 star systems," the being continued. "An impressive achievement for such young species. but you've made the same mistake that 17 civilizations before you have made. What mistake? General Thrix demanded. You assumed that conquest was the same as growth, that expansion was the same as evolution, that power over others was the same as power over yourselves. The galactic map began to change, showing the rise and fall of previous interstellar civilizations. Each one followed the same pattern: explosive expansion, military dominance, and then slow decline into irrelevance. The Karathi Empire controlled 5,000 worlds before they collapsed into civil war. The Nexus Collective spanned 3 spiral arms before they fragmented into competing factions. The Eternal Dynasty lasted 50,000 years before they simply stopped trying. Korvax felt cold certainty settling in his chest. You're saying we're doomed to fail. Not doomed, but following a predictable path. Unless what? The being's expression became infinitely sad. Unless you choose a different way forward, the way we chose, the way humanity is choosing. The display showed Earth again, but not as it appeared to Imperial sensors. This was Earth as seen by beings who could perceive across dimensions. A world crackling with potential energy, its surface covered by patterns of life and thought and possibility that were beautiful beyond description. Humanity is different, the being explained, not because they're stronger or smarter or more advanced, but because they've learned something your species never did. What? That true power comes not from controlling others but from enabling them to become more than they were. The display showed human history, not the wars and conquests that Imperial intelligence had focused on, but the moments of cooperation and growth. Scientists sharing discoveries, artists inspiring each other, teachers helping students surpass them, entire civilizations lifting each other toward something greater. Every species that achieves interstellar travel faces the same test, the being continued. Do you use your power to dominate or to elevate? Do you see other species as resources to exploit or as partners in becoming something greater? Korvax felt the weight of the question settle on his shoulders. Around the council table, his fellow commanders were silent, each grappling with implications that stretched beyond anything they'd ever considered. The Empire has chosen domination, General Thrix said quietly. It's the foundation of everything. We are? Yes, the being agreed, and that choice has led you here. To a war you cannot win against a species that refuses to hate you. What do you mean? General Chen's image returned to the display. Her face showed exhaustion, but also something else, a kind of determined compassion that Korvax had never seen before. Admiral, she said, in the past week humanity has developed weapons that could extinguish your entire fleet. We could turn every Imperial world into a geometric paradox. We could rewrite the laws of physics in your home systems until your species simply ceased to exist. Korvax's hands tightened on his chair. Then why haven't you? Because that's not who we want to be. Chen's voice carried absolute conviction. We've spent the last 10,000 years learning that violence only creates more violence, that conquest only breeds resentment, that true security comes from helping others become stronger, not from making them weaker. She paused, looking directly at Korvax through the display. We don't want to destroy the Empire. We want to help it become something better. The chamber fell silent. For long moments, the only sound was the hum of the ship's systems and the quiet breathing of beings who were confronting the possibility that everything they'd believed was wrong. Finally, Korvax spoke. What are you proposing? A choice, Chen replied. The same choice humanity made 10,000 years ago, when we realized that cooperation was more powerful than competition. The same choice these beings made millions of years ago, when they decided to guide instead of conquer. The ancient being's voice filled the chamber again. Admiral Korvax, your species stands at a crossroads. You can continue on your current path, expanding through force, ruling through fear, taking what you need from others. That path leads to the same place it has led 17 other species: stagnation, decline, and eventual extinction. Or, you can choose to grow, to learn, to become partners in building something greater than any single species could achieve alone. Korvax looked around the council table at his fellow commanders. In their eyes, he saw the same struggle he felt in his own heart. Everything they'd been taught, everything they'd believed, everything they'd built their identities around was being challenged. But he also saw something else, something he'd never noticed before. Fear. Not fear of humanity's weapons, though those were terrifying enough. Not fear of the ancient beings, though their power was beyond comprehension. Fear that they were alone. Fear that their expansion and conquest had led them into an empty universe where they were the only intelligence that mattered. Fear that all their victories were hollow, because there was no one left worth fighting alongside. If we agree to this, he said slowly, what happens to the Empire? It evolves, Chen replied. The same way humanity evolved from scattered tribes to a global civilization. The same way these ancient beings evolved from conquerors to gardeners of intelligence. You join us in something bigger, the ancient being added. Not as subjects or servants, but as partners. You bring your strengths, your organizational skills, your military discipline, your incredible diversity of species and perspectives. We bring ours, our technology, our wisdom, our understanding of what's possible when intelligence cooperates instead of competing. And together, Chen concluded, we build something that none of us could achieve alone. A galaxy-spanning civilization, based not on conquest but on growth, not on fear but on possibility. Korvax stood slowly, feeling the weight of decision settling on his shoulders. Around him, the council waited for words that would determine the fate of both species. In the end, the choice was simple. He could continue down the path that 17 other species had walked, expansion, conquest, and eventual extinction in an empty universe. Or he could take a step into something completely unknown, but filled with potential. General Chen, he said formally, the Galactic Empire accepts your proposal, but I have one condition. Name it. We need to know what we're really joining, what you're really building, what these ancient beings are really offering. Chen smiled. For the first time since the war began. Admiral, we're building the future, all of us together, and honestly, we have no idea what it's going to look like. But we're going to find out together. For the first time in his career, Fleet Admiral Korvax found himself looking forward to not knowing what came next. The war was over. The real adventure was about to begin. Epilogue. New Beginnings. 6 months later. Dr. Marcus Webb stood on the Phi observation deck of the New Horizon, humanity's first joint construction with the Galactic Empire, watching Earth rotate slowly below. The planet looked different now, brighter somehow, as if the blue marble had learned to smile. Orbital construction platforms hung in synchronized orbit, their impossible geometries a fusion of human creativity and imperial engineering. Ships that had once been weapons of conquest now served as research vessels, exploration craft, and mobile laboratories where species that had been enemies were learning to be friends. Still can't believe it worked, said Commander Zephyrin, joining him at the observation window. The former Imperial officer had been among the first to volunteer for the joint program, trading her warship command for a position as head of interspecies cultural exchange. Honestly, Webb replied, neither can I. 6 months ago, you were trying to conquer us. Now we're building warp gates together. Zephyrin's mandibles clicked in what Webb had learned was the Imperial equivalent of laughter. 6 months ago, I thought conquest was the only way to grow. Turns out cooperation is much more interesting. Through the deck speakers, the station's communication system crackled to life. All senior staff to the main conference room. Priority. Alpha meeting in progress. Webb and Zephyrin exchanged glances. Priority Alpha meetings were reserved for discoveries that could change everything. They found the conference room buzzing with excitement. General Chen stood at the head of the table, surrounded by a mixed group of human scientists and Imperial researchers. The main display showed a star chart unlike anything Webb had ever seen. People, Chen announced, we've just received a transmission from the Deep Space Monitoring Station, and it's significant. Dr. Elena Vasquez, now director of the Joint Space Monitoring Program, stepped forward. The signal originated from the Andromeda Galaxy. That's 2.5 million light-years away. Webb felt his breath catch. That's impossible. Even our most advanced communication systems can't reach that far. That's what we thought too, Vasquez replied, her voice tight with excitement. But the signal isn't using conventional physics. It's riding quantum entanglement waves that we didn't even know existed until last month. The display shifted, showing a complex waveform that pulsed with strange harmonics. But as Webb watched, he began to see patterns in the chaos, mathematical structures that seemed almost familiar. What does it say? Chen asked. Vasquez smiled. It says, "Hello, cousins. We've been waiting for you to grow up enough to hear us." The room fell silent. Around the table, humans and former Imperials stared at the display with the same expression of wonder and terror. "There are others," whispered Commander Zephyrin. "Other species like humanity." "Not just other species," corrected a new voice. The ancient being that had guided humanity's development materialized in the center of the room, its form shimmering with contained starlight. "Other graduates," Webb found his voice. "Graduates? The test you just passed, learning cooperation over conquest, growth over domination, it's not unique to this galaxy. Across the universe, intelligence faces the same choice. Most fail. Some, like humanity and your Imperial friends, succeed. And those who succeed," the being continued, "eventually grow powerful enough to reach across the void between galaxies, to find others who made the same choice, to build something truly magnificent." Chen leaned forward. "You're talking about a universal civilization, multiple galaxies working together." "We're talking about the next stage of existence," the being replied. "When intelligence becomes so advanced, so cooperative, so creative, that the physical universe itself becomes just the first chapter in a much larger story." The implications hit Webb like a physical force. Everything they'd achieved, the end of the war, the cooperation between species, the incredible technological advances, was just the beginning. "How many galaxies are part of this network?" asked Zephyrin. "Currently, 47. But the universe is vast and intelligence is patient. Every few million years, another galaxy graduates. Another species learns that cooperation is more powerful than conquest. Another civilization joins the eternal conversation." The display changed again, showing a web of light that stretched across impossible distances. Each node was a galaxy, each connection a link between civilizations that had learned to grow together instead of fight alone. "This is what you're inheriting," the being explained. "Not just the technology or the knowledge, but the responsibility. You become gardeners of intelligence, helping younger species make the same choice you made." Webb thought about Earth 6 months ago, divided, frightened, facing what seemed like extinction. Now they were being invited to join something beyond imagination. "There's one more thing," Vasquez said quietly. "The transmission included coordinates. They're inviting us to visit." "Visit where?" Chen asked. "The Council of Galaxies. It's a construct built in the void between galactic clusters where representatives from all 47 member civilizations meet to decide what comes next for the universe." The room buzzed with excited conversation. Scientists compared notes. Military officers discussed logistics. Former enemies planned as allies. But Webb found himself looking out the window at Earth, thinking about all the humans down there who were still figuring out how to live together on one small planet. How could they possibly be ready for this? As if reading his thoughts, the ancient being materialized beside him. "Feeling overwhelmed?" it asked gently. "Terrified," Webb admitted. 6 months ago, we were a single planet. Now you're talking about us helping to guide the development of the universe. How can we possibly be ready for that?" "The same way you were ready to end a war through compassion instead of conquest," the being replied. "The same way you were ready to turn enemies into friends. The same way you were ready to look beyond your own survival to the growth of others. One step at a time." Webb nodded, feeling some of the weight lift from his shoulders. What's the first step? Build the ship that will take your representatives to the council. Learn about the other graduates. Start preparing your species for the responsibilities that come with true maturity. And most importantly, the being added with something that might have been a smile. Keep being human. Keep asking questions that others haven't thought of. Keep finding solutions that surprise even us. Keep being the chaotic, creative, impossible species that caught our attention in the first place. As if summoned by those words, alarms began sounding throughout the station. But these weren't emergency alarms, they were discovery alerts. All senior staff to the primary laboratory immediately, came the announcement. We have a breakthrough. The group hurried through the station's corridors, passing windows that showed the ongoing construction projects. Human and Imperial workers labored side by side, building ships and structures that combined the best of both civilizations. They found the laboratory in chaos, the good kind of chaos that came from scientific breakthrough. Dr. Sarah Kim, the project's lead physicist, stood before a device that seemed to twist light around itself. We did it, she announced breathlessly. We actually did it. Did what? Chen demanded. We built a stable wormhole generator, not just for communication, for travel. We can now create passages through space-time that connect any 2 points in the universe. Webb stared at the impossible device. You're saying we can travel to other galaxies? I'm saying, Kim replied with a grin that threatened to split her face. We can travel anywhere. The physics involved require cooperation between human creativity and Imperial precision. Neither species could have built this alone. But together, she gestured at the reality-bending machine. Together, we can literally reach the stars. Around the laboratory, humans and former Imperials worked together on calculations that would have been impossible for either species alone. The same cooperation that had ended their war was now opening pathways to infinity. How long until we can send a delegation to the council? Chen asked. Give us another month to scale up the technology, Kim replied. But General, who do you send to represent an entire galaxy? It was a good question. How do you choose ambassadors for something unprecedented? How do you speak for millions of species, billions of worlds, countless forms of life and intelligence? The answer came from an unexpected source. You send the ones who chose cooperation over conquest, said Admiral Korvax, entering the laboratory. With a mixed group of Imperial commanders and human officers, you send the ones who proved that former enemies can become friends. Webb looked around the room at the impossible scene. Humans and aliens working together, building technologies that could reshape the universe, preparing to take their place, in a civilization that spanned galaxies. 6 months ago, this would have been fantasy. Now it was just Tuesday. Admiral, Chen said formally, would you and your people be willing to represent the Imperial perspective at the Council? General, Korvax replied with equal formality. It would be an honor. As the two former enemies shook hands, or in Korvax's case, clasped multiple appendages, Webb realized he was witnessing something historic. Not just the end of humanity's isolation, but the beginning of something that had never existed before. A galaxy united not by conquest, but by choice. A civilization built not on fear, but on hope. A future where the only limits were the ones they chose to accept. Through the laboratory windows, Earth continued its ancient rotation, carrying 8 billion humans who were about to discover that they were no longer alone in an empty universe. They were part of something magnificent, something that stretched across the cosmos and reached toward possibilities that had no names yet. And the best part? This was still just the beginning. In the depths of space, construction began on humanity's first intergalactic vessel. The ship would carry representatives from Earth and the former Empire to a meeting of minds that spanned the universe itself. But it would also carry something more important. Proof that intelligence, when it chose cooperation over conflict, could build wonders that exceeded the dreams of any single species. The age of isolation was ending. The age of infinite possibility had begun. And somewhere in the void between galaxies, ancient beings who had been alone for eons smiled as they felt the universe grow a little less empty. The children were finally ready to come home. End of story.